DES permit from South Carolina DHEC. This is one of many permits that Duke must obtain. Randy Thompson, DHEC permit engineer, will make a short presentation to explain the specifics of this permit application, and then we will take your questions until 7 p.m. At 7 p.m., we will begin the formal public hearing where we will record your comments for the official record. During that time, no questions will be answered. I would now like to introduce Randy Thompson.
My name is Randy Thompson. I work at DHEC in Columbia in the Industrial Wastewater Permitting section. I'm the DHEC engineer who reviewed the application and drafted the permit for this project. As Karen said, we're here to discuss the draft NPDES permit decision. If you could go ahead and, Jessica, get that PowerPoint up, please. The draft NPDES permit decision for the Duke Energy Lee Nuclear Station. Duke proposes to install 2 Westinghouse AP1000 nuclear reactors. It will have a net generation capacity of approximately 2,200 megawatts. And this draft NPDES permit is our topic of discussion tonight. Next slide, please. As Karen said, there's kind of 2 parts to the agenda tonight. The informational meeting, informal meeting right now, and then at 7 o'clock the hearing. If you have any comments that you want for the record that we will officially respond to, you'll need to make those during the actual public hearing. During this part, I'll do my best to answer any questions you have. After the public hearing and after the public comment period closes, April 19th, we will consider all of those comments and respond to those comments. And those who signed in today will receive a response to those comments and notice of our final decision. Next slide, please. NPDES, as Karen mentioned, stands for National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. It's authorized by the Federal Clean Water Act. The purpose of an NPDES regulatory system is to regulate pollutants being discharged to surface waters such as rivers, lakes, streams. South Carolina DHEC is a delegated state to implement the NPDES program, like most states are delegated to implement the program in lieu of the United States Environmental Protection Agency. However, EPA has oversight authority over us in our implementation of the NPDES program. And in fact, EPA Region 4 in Atlanta and EPA headquarters have reviewed this draft permit, and their comments are reflected in the draft permit that we put out on public notice. Next slide, please. The main focus of this draft NPDES permit is 2 main issues. Now, the draft permit contains many standard conditions that we include in all of our NPDES permit, but the 2 main issues that involve my review and that maybe will be the topic of our discussion tonight have to do with the intake design. That would be the design and operation of the cooling water intake structures, and the regulatory focus of that, what the regulations require on that, is for us to be looking at the impact of that on aquatic life in the river or in the lakes where those intakes are located, and specifically to be looking at impingement or entrainment impacts. Impingement would be if a fish is swimming past the intake screen and gets too close to the screen, it could get sucked up against the screen and stuck there. Entrainment would be for smaller organisms such as fish eggs or larvae that are too small and would pass through the screen openings into the cooling water system and presumably would not survive that. The other main issue that we look at is the amount of pollutants that can be discharged into the stream, into the Broad River in a protective manner. And on this, we're looking at not only aquatic life, but also human health concerns as well. We consider drinking water or consumption of fish that people may catch in the Broad River in the area that may be affected by the discharge. The main discharge from this project is from the cooling towers. The cooling towers have to discharge because As water is evaporated from the cooling towers, the natural substances in the cooling water that comes from the Broad River, such as minerals or salts, as water is evaporated, that concentration increases. And to keep that from becoming a problem in the cooling towers, they have to discharge some of that cooling water and bring in fresh new water. And that discharge we call cooling tower blowdown. The cooling tower blowdown comprises about 98% of this discharge. The other approximately 2% of the discharge is other processed wastewaters. Next slide, please. This is an aerial photograph. Here, this is the Broad River coming down. This would be the plant site where they would be building the plant. Pond A is existing, Pond B is existing, and Pond C is a proposed pond that would be constructed. I would just add that the construction of this Pond C is not an issue with regard to the issuance of this permit. There are other permits that address that. This permit assumes that Pond C will be constructed as it was designed. The intake at the Broad River would be located about here, and the wastewater discharge would be right on the upstream side of the 99 Islands Dam. This is the 99 Islands Dam right here. There would also be intakes in Pond A, about here, and intake in Pond B, somewhere in this area, and in Pond C, somewhere in this general area. Sometimes folks refer to these ponds as cooling ponds, but actually they don't provide any cooling benefit. They are a source for cooling water, but the cooling towers are what's providing the cooling effect for the plant. The intake here at the Broad River, the water from the intake there would be withdrawn from the Broad River and go to Pond A, where any solids, any suspended solids in the water would be settled out and then into the plant area to be used as cooling water. Ponds B and C will be used as an additional source of cooling water when the flow in the Broad River is too low to allow an adequate flow to pass through the 99 Islands Dam. When that occurs, they will stop withdrawing cooling water from this intake and will withdraw their cooling water from ponds B and C. As ponds B and C are used during these low flow conditions in the Broad River, they will need to refill those ponds. So this intake here has two sections really. One is the primary section of the intake, which will be used during normal operations, take water from the river to Pond A to the plant. It also has a drought contingency section of the intake that will be used during low flow conditions in the Broad River that will take water from the intake to Pond B, to Pond C, and then from Pond C or Pond B, it will go to Pond A and then into the plant. Next slide, please. This permit has a very specific focus, and it's several things that it does not address. It doesn't address stormwater issues. There are other NPDES permits that address stormwater discharges if there's any land disturbance from construction activities or any stormwater runoff from industrial activity. It also doesn't address the South Carolina DHEC 401 water quality certification. DHEC is required to make a decision on, it's called a 401 water quality certification on any federal permits that are issued to facilities in South Carolina. And in this case, there are two federal permits of particular interest. One is the Army Corps of Engineers 404 permit. 404 is a section of the Clean Water Act. Sometimes that's called a wetlands permit. And this permit is really addressing, in addition to some other things, the construction of that Pond C. The other major federal permit or license is the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission license. The South Carolina Public Service Commission will be looking at the need for the plant. That has not been determined yet either. Also, NRC looks at the need to some degree as well. There will also be a South Carolina DHEC water withdrawal permit that will address the water withdrawal in addition to this permit, and there may be other state and federal requirements as well. In fact, there is one other federal permit that's in existence for the 99 Islands Dam. It's issued by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC, and it regulates the flows from the 99 Islands Dam. And this permit also doesn't address local land use or zoning issues. Next slide, please. What this permit does address is, again, the two main issues: at what rate can water be pulled from the river and the ponds, and at what levels can pollutants be discharged back to the river. And we do consider, our regulations consider heat to be a pollutant, because that cooling tower blowdown will be a heated discharge. Next slide, please. So to talk about that first issue, the water withdrawal issue, under normal operations, again, they will be withdrawing from that Broad River intake. That primary section of the intake has a capacity of 98 cubic feet per second, or 98 CFS. If you wanted to convert that to million gallons per day, it'd be about 50 million gallons per day. Now, under normal operations, they only need about 78 CFS, as opposed to the capacity of 98 CFS. Under normal operations, they would be withdrawing 78 cubic feet per second. Of that, 23 CFS would be returned to the river, either as screen wash water or as the discharge of the cooling tower blowdown. And then 55 CFS would be evaporated from the cooling tower. So we call that 23 CFS that's returned, the non-consumptive portion of the withdrawal amount, and then the 55 CFS is consumed. Now, under low flow conditions, and for the purposes of this permit, low flow conditions would be when flows in the Broad River are not adequate to allow at least 483 CFS to pass through the 99 Islands Dam. Now you may wonder, well, where does that 483 CFS number passing through the 99 Islands Dam come from? It comes from that FERC license that I mentioned to you, that FERC issued for the 99 Islands Dam. That license has minimum flows in it that the dam must allow to pass through for downstream users for different times of the year, and that 483 CFS is the lowest of those minimum flows. So when the flows in the Broad River are not adequate to allow 483 CFS to pass, again, they'll be getting that water from Pond B or C. And then to refill ponds B and C, they'll be using the drought contingency section of the river intake. The drought contingency section of the river intake has a capacity of 206 CFS. So that's a total capacity for that river intake of 206 plus 98 CFS of 304 cubic feet per second. The reason it's broken up like that is for a regulatory reason. The regulations for cooling water intake structures state that the design intake flow for cooling water intake structures must not exceed 5% of the mean annual flow of the river. And in this case, the mean annual flow of the Broad River is 1,956 CFS. 5% of that is 98 CFS. So that 5% is for the 98 CFS. That's why you have the primary section set at 98 CFS. But those same regulations also state that if compliance with that requirement would result in a significant adverse impact to local water resources, then the department can in a permit, issue an alternative requirement. And that's in fact what we have done in this case. We are allowing an alternative requirement in this draft permit to also allow an additional 206 CFS at this river intake. And the reason for that is because we believe that compliance with the 98 CFS would cause a significant adverse impact to local water resources. Let me explain why that is. The 98 CFS would, under the regulations, is what the capacity of that intake is allowed to be. It's 5% of what the mean annual flow of the river has been for the past 10 years. Therefore, if we just went by the 98 CFS, even when Broad River flows are low, 200 CFS, they would be allowed to withdraw up to 98 CFS. So rather than doing that, Duke Energy has committed to allowing at least 483 CFS to pass through the dam and using the ponds to make up the additional amount needed in that case. But in order to do that, they need additional volume to refill those ponds, and that's where the 206 CFS comes from. So that 206 CFS is based on an additional requirement, an alternative requirement that the department is allowing in this case. Also under the cooling water intake structures, they're required to have the velocity through the screens is limited to 1/2 foot per second. That just helps to keep fish from being impinged. If it's 1/2 foot per second, the water going through the screens, studies have shown that fish can escape from that kind of velocity. Next slide, please. The other main issue is the wastewater discharge, and again, that discharge point is at the upstream side of the dam. In fact, the discharge pipe will be attached to the dam, to that upstream side. The discharge amount will be approximately 18 CFS, which is about 11.8 MGD. As I mentioned, it's a heated discharge. The draft permit allows a temperature discharge of 95 degrees Fahrenheit during the summer months of June to September, and 90 degrees Fahrenheit from October to May. The permit also addresses toxicity. It requires that the overall toxicity of the wastewater be tested monthly, and it limits the toxicity of the wastewater discharge. Radioactivity is not regulated under this permit. Federal law prohibits states from regulating the radioactivity, so radioactivity is regulated strictly by the United States Nuclear Regulatory Commission. There are also, in addition to that one discharge point at the dam, we call that an external outfall, there are also 3 internal outfalls, and those 3 internal outfalls combine to make the one total external outfall, and those are for the cooling tower blowdown, the other miscellaneous process wastewaters, which go through a wastewater treatment system, and then low-level radioactive waste. And we place permit limits on those internal outfalls as well, just to address best technology, to require best technology measures be taken at those outfalls. Next slide. If you need more information, we have additional information on our website there. It's listed on the slide, and next slide. And I'll be glad, any of us I'm sure would be glad to talk with you further. Feel free to email me or call me. I'll be glad to answer any questions you have. And now I'll be glad to do my best to answer any questions you have about the project or the permit.
All right, we will now begin the question and answer portion of the evening. If you have a question, please raise your hand and wait until Crystal on this side will get to you with a microphone, or Karen, I will get to you over on this side so that everyone can hear your question, and then Randy will answer it. All right, so I'm coming right to you.
I was wondering, what is the downstream dam and how old is it?
The dam is the 99 Islands Dam that's right where the discharge is. The discharge is right on the upstream side of that dam. And It was built in the early 1900s. I heard somebody say in 1910 it was constructed.
Actually, what is the dam after that one? And how old is it?
I believe that there's a dam. Okay.
It's on this map, there's two.
Okay, yeah, I'm just getting information here myself. There's two other dams apparently before you get to Carlisle. One is at Lockhart, and then another one, Neal Shoals, and those are hydroelectric facilities as well. Sir? Well,
There's plans to, from what I understand, I don't think it's been announced, they're gonna build a new hydroelectric plant at Lockhart. Milligan and Company's building that. And and I'm concerned about the water, and I know you crunched the numbers, and you said it's, you're gonna take 50 million gallons of water a day out, and 75% of it, I think that's the number you said, 75% of it will be evaporation. And you're only putting 25% back in. And I'm an old man that remembers in 1950, the city of Union gets all of their water for the drinking water out of Broad River. And the city of Union supplies 6 rural water districts, which I'm a board member of Browns Creek Water Company. And I'm concerned about the amount of water that's going to be flowing down the river to Union. Because in the past, we've been fighting, South Carolina's been fighting with North Carolina about the amount of water coming down all the rivers into South Carolina. And I don't think it's been resolved as of today. I know you said you crunched the numbers, and the number says it'll work, but I don't think so. And another thing that I'm concerned about, in 1972, they started this nuclear plant. And why did they abandon it then, and why are they bringing it back on now?
right, well, I mean, back in 1972, I don't know that I can speak fully to that, but what I've heard is the economic conditions at that time is what I understand resulted in Duke abandoning that project back at that time.
Did it not have anything to do with the water supply?
I don't have any. Yeah, he was asking if the abandonment of those plans back in the early 70s, mid-70s had anything to do with water issues, and I'm just, I don't have any information along those lines. Well, I don't believe I answered one of his questions. Well, your general comment was about your concern about the water, and I mean, there's no doubt this project uses a significant amount of water. You know, from this permit's perspective, from the regulations that I have to go by, what we're looking at is the effect of that on aquatic life. Again, the impingement and the entrainment of that on aquatic life. You know, the South Carolina water withdrawal permit that will be required. You know, I believe that will be looking at overall water use issues in a bigger way. But again, you know, I believe that the program that we have in place in the draft permit in not withdrawing water when broad river flows are low would be the best way to handle this, and then allowing more water to be withdrawn when the river can handle that.
Did I understand you correctly that this dam, it is an earthen dam, is it not? At 99 Island is 103 years old? Is it
Right.
concrete? But it's
Yeah,
103 years old?
That's my understanding as well. That it's a concrete dam. It was built in the early 1900s. Yes,
Yes.
but I understand that this.
We're looking at an antique, in other words, right?
Yeah,
If you're over 75,
The FERC license that I mentioned is really the permit that would be addressing the safety of that dam. This permit really does not have much to do with the safety of that dam or the age of that dam.
it just astounds me that, we have these little bits and pieces that deal with permits for something this big and this dangerous. that nobody's really responsible for everything. Is that correct? I mean, you keep saying this, you
That's
know,
correct.
everybody's got a little piece.
Right, there's many regulatory programs that have to be addressed, that's correct.
Just a quick question on the numbers. You were saying that the 23 cubic feet is going to go back, or 25?
23 cubic feet per second. would
Okay,
be-
and the outlet number was 18 by the dam. Where did the 5 or 7?
The 5 was screen wash water. At the actual intake, they'll be rinsing the screens, so that 5 CFS would be returned there, and then the other 18 at the discharge point.
I have two questions. One directly related to what you're doing. The second is somewhat related, but probably not related to this process. Ponds A, B, and C. If you took no water out of the Broad River, how long would the plant be able to operate before it drained those 3 ponds?
Well, the plan is not to draw down Pond A, so Pond A...
I understand
Okay,
that,
okay, but you still want to
but
ask that question. Right.
I know you know the answer to that question.
Honestly, I have a rough figure in my mind, if you don't want to...
Rough figure is fine.
Yeah, as I recall, Pond A had 11 days of capacity or something like that. Pond B had maybe 30 days of capacity. And Pond C, I don't remember if it was 90 days but yeah, it was significantly more than Pond B. So somewhere in that range.
Did you have a minimum amount requirement for those ponds for the plant?
No, if you're getting to is there going to be enough cooling water to properly shut? Are you getting at the issue of, is there enough cooling water to shut down the plant if...
I was really just curious on how much water, I mean, this thing's taking in a huge amount of water. Your permit is really based on A, B, and C, which is not built. And so that water is critical to the overall plan. And I was just curious on how much water you had there to be able to take care of it in case we don't go back to the 50s or 72.
Right. My review really did not get into looking at, is Pond B and C enough extra water to handle the needs of the plant for a certain length of time if Broad River flows can't handle that. I would imagine the NRC would be looking at that, though.
Let's get back to him. Let's get to people who have it. Yeah, he can ask a second one. Okay.
My second question is, it's my understanding there's not going to be any public use for the water like Pond C. Is that true or false, like we have at the other parts of the upstate with the like Lake Jocassee?
Right. My understanding is that the South Carolina Department of Natural Resources, DNR, has been in discussions with Duke Energy about that. DHEC is not involved in those discussions as far as I know. I certainly haven't been. And yeah, your understanding is what? I believe that's correct. The last I heard anyway was that Pond C was not going to be something that was going to be open for public use.
How do we protest that?
How would you protest that? Again, it's not, that's kind of beyond what I have looked at. I would suggest maybe contacting Duke Energy or contacting the Department of Natural Resources. Yeah.
It's beyond the scope of our permit.
I'm curious about the toxicity and the mixing zones. And again, you keep talking about whether or not the flows of the Broad River are going to be low, which is why they want to build this Pond C. Because obviously, they know there's severe drought. They know the Broad River is low. It's about ankle deep in some places and turning into mud flats and others. So I'm wondering why NRC, how can NRC be in charge of looking at that water, but DHEC is not?
What I was referring to, the gentleman was asking about was the size of ponds.
The capacity. I
The
understand
size
the
of the ponds B and C, if those were adequate, and you're not understanding my answer on that. Like my answer was that was not a part of our review. To me, that gets to the safety of the plant. Is there enough cooling water? Yeah, this DHEC permit here is not addressing the safety of this nuclear
I'm not
power
talking about
plant.
that. I said
Okay.
toxicity. You have
Okay.
at the discharge point, there has to be a place where it's mixed to reduce the toxicity of the effluent. Isn't that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
So my question is, are any of these ponds going to have to be tapped for that dilution, so to speak, if the Broad River is too low?
No, they will not. The permit condition, the permit limitations for toxicity are based on a 7Q10 value for the Broad River flow. That would be the lowest 7-day flow over a 10-year period. And so we use that worst case flow in our analysis to determine what the dilution would be for toxicity purposes. And it would not consider allowing Duke to bring in any other water from pond B or C to further dilute that for toxicity purposes.
Okay, if you can indulge me, I have another question. Again, because you're dealing with normal operations, or what you're assuming will be normal, so you don't deal with water emergencies. That would be FERC. In other words, if there's any kind of emergency with these 2 units, we have no idea, because you have no data, because they haven't even built it yet, whether or not there's going to be sufficient water for emergency purposes.
It's my
And
understanding
that's
that would
FERC?
be an NRC issue. If there was enough cooling water for emergency issues, that would be an NRC issue. The FERC is mainly regulating the dam,
I see.
the hydroelectric project.
Yes, you said that the water put back in the river, winter and summer, 90 and 95. What are the temperatures of the water being put back into the river? I'll ask you that question again. What are the temperatures of the water winter and summer now? And what range of life forms are affected by the difference between those temperatures?
Okay. I can tell you that the modeling that was done to determine what would happen when that heated discharge would be discharged, the modeling that would be done to show the thermal plume and how large that would be. It used a river temperature in the summer of 88 degrees, and it used a temperature in the winter of 40-something degrees. I don't remember exactly, 44, I think, maybe, degrees in the winter. In the winter, the main issue that we would be looking at is the water quality criterion that says there can be no greater than a 5-degree increase in a stream. So with a 44-degree river temperature, you could see, well, that would be the primary issue. The other water quality criterion that we look at is a 90-degree Fahrenheit, just flat-out temperature for streams. That's another water quality criterion, and that would be the limiting criterion in the summer. So that they used an 88 river temperature in the summer, and that's what was modeled.
Was that actually researched? I'm not talking about modeling, I'm talking about did somebody put a thermometer in the water?
Did anyone put a thermometer in the water to check those?
I don't know.
Seems like a missing piece.
I would certainly assume that number was based on data.
Can you show that?
maybe I can answer the question right now. There is a US GS state, and some of them record the temperature. I have no idea if this state in Gaffney is doing this job. On the other place, we have found in the last summer, 2012, the temperature of the water was 92 degrees Fahrenheit in the summertime. And what is really important that in the summertime, we have to run all the reactors because we need energy mostly for air conditioners. Because I have right now a microphone, I have a few things to tell. I found a little bit different number than you, sir, put on your slides. This is probably numbers taken from the Duke Energy, so maybe I know that this is not your error or whatever. But from the previous application from South Carolina Electric Gas, they just give for exactly this to 81,000 a little bit different numbers. So for withdrawal would be was 83 cubic feet per second, but what is much more important here, the maximum was start as a 137 cubic feet per second. So for this reason, the INTAC would have a problem to take this amount. And this probably because of this temperature, about over 50 degrees Fahrenheit in the water taken to the cooling system, probably would have a problem to really cool this down, this reactor. So this is kind of question, engineering type of question. Duke will have a chance to cool reactors. And of course, there's a small difference also with the discharge is 21 cubic feet by Westinghouse and maximum 68 cubic feet per second. If you're going to take this 68 cubic feet per second, you'll probably have to make a much tougher requirements for Duke Energy. Thank you.
I guess those are comments, not questions. But we'll get that during the comment period. I'm coming back to this gentleman who's been waiting a while.
I have a question in reference to, are we talking about 1 or 2 units at Cherokee?
They are proposing 2 nuclear reactors.
Okay. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, the second unit is to sell power to Florida. Am I correct?
I have no information about that.
Well, the paper stated that you fired the person who made that statement, so I assume it to be correct. Also, several years ago, you raised the rate based on the fact that they thought they would sell a certain amount of power and they couldn't, so therefore they raised the rate. Since that time, Cliffside has been doubled or tripled, I'm not sure which. And is it safe to assume that once this company gets its stuff in a sock, I'll be nice here, will the people get a refund that have overpaid for the profit that they didn't make, or will the DMC money take care of that? I'm just
Again, those aren't DHEC questions, I'm afraid, though they are good points that you're making.
I can answer that. They're asking for a 16% increase from the state of South Carolina. I've got an article in the Herald this past week.
Could you repeat that? Could you repeat that?
I wanted to ask another question about the temperature of the river. I know when we had heat waves here a couple of years ago, some of the nuclear plants had to be shut down, and I know that happened in France recently too. And scientists are predicting steadily rising temperatures for us. I want to know if the river temperatures do keep going up, because temperatures are going to keep going up. Are these limits about water temperature something that Duke is going to come back to you and say, oh, sorry, it's hotter now. Will you please raise these temperatures for the river? Or is that set in stone so that, you know, when the climate does continue to get warmer, they'll have to shut the nukes if the river gets too hot?
Okay. There is always the opportunity for a facility to request a permit modification if they have reason to support a permit modification. So the other thing I would say about those temperature limits is that they are based on some conservative inputs as well, some conservative assumptions. One is that in the summer, the maximum temperature discharge is expected to be in the range of 89 to 90 degrees. Now Duke has requested a 95 degree Fahrenheit discharge limit, I guess, should they have to need that, but under ongoing operations, it would not be expected that 95 would be the expected long-term temperature. Also, for that winter discharge, or the October to May discharge temperature limit of 90 degrees, that's significantly higher than what they would expect during the winter time. I think they would expect a temperature discharge of about 70 degrees during the winter months.
So is your rationale for these upper limits based on the fact that it would kill too many creatures to let it go above that? Or, I mean, what is the rationale for picking that number?
Right. The rationale for the limits is based in our South Carolina water quality standards, our South Carolina water quality criteria. And as I was mentioning earlier, those criteria are 90 degrees Fahrenheit for the stream and a 5-degree temperature rise. So now there is, from this discharge, there's going to be a small area right upstream of the dam. It's an area about 70 feet by 200 feet where the discharge will be mixing with the incoming river water, where those standards won't be met. But all of that occurs on the upstream side of the dam, again in that area of roughly 70 feet by 200 feet. Did that answer your question? Okay.
When they build that Lake C there, since they done took everybody's property down there, what's the chances of them taking other people's property to build a landfill down there?
I haven't heard any talk about a landfill.
Let's talk about what they're gonna put back in the river as far as pollutants.
Okay.
You talked about it a little bit a while ago. There's an article that is in the Union County News, and I'll read over the line. It says, this permit allows arsenic, lead, aluminum, and other toxins to be returned to the river with limited monitoring, impacting wildlife and folks downstream who drink water. Drinking water comes from the Broad. Now in Union, we've had a problem in the last year meeting our THMs and our HAAs with the plant, the Cypress plant. You familiar with that problem?
I'm somewhat familiar
with what they were putting back in?
Yes.
You know, now, what will they be putting back in the river with the monitoring of lead and everything putting back in there? And we're having a problem now of trying to keep our THMs and HAAs under control.
Right. Yeah.
It's gonna get worse because you guys have tightened the standard a little bit more.
On the THMs?
Yeah.
Okay. This gentleman is referring to issues at the City of Union. The City of Union has a drinking water intake downstream of the 99 Islands Dam, and that's the first downstream drinking water intake that the discharge would encounter. In the past year, maybe year and a half or so, the City of Union has had some problems with total trihalogenated methanes, TTHMs, and when the department found out about that, this is not my project, I've just learned about it, found about that issue, we investigated and determined that this TTHM problem that the City of Union drinking water intake was having was coming from a plant in Blacksburg that was discharging relatively high levels of bromides in the hundreds of milligrams per liter level. This Duke plant, the estimated discharge limit for bromides is 2 milligrams per liter. So we're addressing that TTHM problem by addressing it from that plant in Blacksburg. Now, you want me to talk about the other pollutants? You asked about lead. we are requiring monitoring on a monthly basis for lead.
And what kind of chemicals will they be using to clean with? I know they'll have to do some cleaning and with some kind of solvents and that type thing, and what will they do with those? Don't tell me they're not gonna be doing any cleaning,
Right.
but I know they will.
Yeah.
I hope they will.
I know for the cooling water towers, they will be using some maintenance chemicals for those. Sodium hypochlorite, and I believe it was a chemical, and sodium bromide. But again, for that bromide discharge level I gave you of 2 milligrams per liter, 2.9 milligrams per liter, that takes into account the use of that chemical. Now, on the chlorine, it's my understanding that the operation of the cooling towers, they will shut off the discharge of the blowdown until the chlorine shows as non-detectable. So the chlorine would not be discharged. The chlorine would dissipate before they would discharge that.
Let me make one more comment. I think we ought to just put this project on hold until our state senator, our government, our state senators, and this so-called president that we got can get the dispute over. Wait a minute, we can get this so-called president that we got in the DHEC and the EPA and everything to agree with North Carolina and South Carolina on the amount of water we're going to get from North Carolina, because they hoarding it up, and we hadn't settled this thing yet. And I see in the future that this is going to be a problem with the amount of water coming down the creek, because I got a son that works. I'm the city of Union, and I know in the last 5 years, you talking about drought conditions, the city of Union would send some of them down to where we draw the water out in the river and have to dig out the hole so they could get enough water to pump up to the pond where they was filtering it.
Let's save things like that for the actual hearing part, and let's stick to the questions so other people will have a chance.
Let me applaud that one for everybody else.
Let me understand, we're getting 98 cubic feet per second, is that what you said? Or 50 million per day.
The capacity of that Broad River primary intake is 98 cubic feet per second. Normal operations, they would be withdrawing 78 cubic feet per second, or 50 MGD.
Well, several years ago, maybe 10 years ago, we had a problem, almost a drought problem here, which was serious, because we had met with several other communities, Union, North Carolina, Shelby, several others with the local utility company here, met with several of those guys because we were having serious problems with Broad River and getting just the water, that we even had to pull some out of Lake Welch at one point in time during that period. And again, I think we're still trying to negotiate some of those issues, but Shelby at one time had jumped the gun and smartly had gone and got an extra permit to pull additional water out before the rest of us got on board and tried to join in on that. So my point is with all this right now, how much water, if this is a 98 cubic feet and 50 million, how much water is already being permitted to the other areas that we're taking already out of Broad River? And with this, what's left? I mean, for emergencies, I mean, what kind of cushion do we have between what's already been permitted? Because if we get another for development purposes, if you get we have a large water usage plant right now on our system that uses quite a bit of water daily to operate. And if we continuously attack Broad River, which is our main source, that can have an effect on down the road for other companies coming in and looking at our area for the water, just for the water, the need for water. So my concern is how we're going to balance all of this and go ahead and take care of the ones that we've already permitted for their drinking water and those things, and the plants that they have already online, to development in the future, and plus taking care of this plant without having some serious consequences on down the road.
All right. As I mentioned, this issue of global water use is not really under the purview of this permit. I think I would encourage you to make these public comments, and the department will consider them. That's all I can really say about that. Now, you mentioned the drought. Back in 2007, 2008 was some of the, I've looked at the flow data for the Broad River going back to like 1920 something, and that 2007, 2008 drought was one of the worst we saw. But what I would point out about that is that that's included in the mean annual flow that Duke had to use in calculating the 5%. So we've got one of the worst droughts we've seen that they've had to consider that in their plans.
My name's Lou Zeller. I'm the Executive Director of Blue Ridge Environmental Defense League. Earlier you said that radioactive pollutants are not regulated under this permit, although this is a Clean Water Act permit, and DHEC is regulating many of the contaminants that we've just heard about. My question is, one of the principal contaminants coming from every nuclear power plant that we've ever looked at is radioactive water. It cannot be filtered because it's hydrogen, it's radioactive hydrogen, it's tritium, and it cannot be filtered. It is the water itself. How can the state of South Carolina allow a federal agency, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, you say, usurp the power of the state to control water quality in South Carolina? How can the governor let that happen?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I believe I also mentioned that the federal law, there's a federal law that prohibits, this is not an easy thing for South Carolina to do, but a federal law prohibits the state from regulating the radioactive component in the discharge. So that's the main point on that.
We're running low on time for questions. Is there anyone who has not asked a question yet that would like to? I have some that have already asked that would like to ask another one. I'll get it to you.
You had stated that the mixing zone is determined by 7Q10 data, is that right? And I was wondering, how often is the 7Q10 data updated? And does the permit, will it be reopened to reevaluate the mixing zone sizing based on updated data? And if so, just wanted some more details on that.
Right. We just got a new 7Q10 from the United States Geological Service for this project in, I believe, September of 2012. We requested that. I'll say that we had a similar hearing as this for the SCNG DC Summer Nuclear Plant, and a public comment was made, shouldn't that 7Q10 be updated? And we accepted that comment, and we adjusted the permit based on that and got an adjusted 7Q10. So knowing that happened at SCNG, we proactively requested that that updated 7Q10 from USGS, and we just recently got that. Now, how often are they updated? I don't know. I believe the most previous 7Q10 prior to that was several years ago, more than 10 years ago, I believe. So you ask, would the permit be updated if we did get a new 7Q10? That brings up an interesting point. This permit is for a term of 5 years. So the permit will probably expire, and we will have to make another permit decision before the plant is even operating. So if there's any new data that comes in that 5-year period, we would be considering that.
I have two questions. One is on page 34 of this draft. It says the river intake withdrawal limitation is a daily limitation and shall be based on a 24-hour average Broad River flow for each day, calendar day 12, and so forth, to be measured at the U.S. Geological Survey gauge in Gaffney. And then it says if the Gaffney gauge is out of service, data from the USGS gauge near Blacksburg shall be used. Does this thing go out of service on a regular basis? And why is Duke not being required to have a backup gauge or pay for a backup gauge there? And then if it goes to Blacksburg, they can adjust the flow for the difference in the drainage areas. That just seems a little gerrymandered to me, and why is that in there?
I know that these USGS gauges do go out of service from time to time. I can't tell you how often that happens, and so in the permit, we just wanted to address that contingency, and we feel that using that Blacksburg gauge with the adjustment for the drainage area, because it's in a different location, the flow would not match exactly with the Gaffney gauge. We feel that that's a reasonable way to address that.
And the USGS does get out and fix those right away, so that's just kind of a contingency plan. Like
Karen, this is your call, but that clock is...
Right, I got one more person.
All right.
Thank you, I appreciate that. I just had a question about enforcement. There's a lot of rules here, there's a lot of monitoring reports, and in the nonprofit world, we have Water Keepers Alliance, we have people who love the river who are watching out for it. And in your department or in the state, is there, I mean, who's watching out for this? Who's making sure that, oops, they didn't see where there was, you know, fish blocking it, or, and the other question is, well, I forgot the other question. If you answered that one,
Okay.
probably.
Yeah, well, like I mentioned when I started my presentation, I work in the permitting area, so my job is to review permits and make recommendations for permit decisions. We have a whole separate area that addresses compliance and enforcement. We have staff in Columbia that oversees that process, and we also have inspectors located throughout the state in our regional offices who visit these facilities and check on their compliance. They occasionally even do, I believe approximately annually, they do follow-up sampling on the discharges as well. So we do have staff.
So this was the other question. Is all that made available to the public? Can we see Duke's reports on what they're stating they're doing or not doing, and we get to see all that? And
Yes.
Is that available online, or do you have to pay for that report?
Unfortunately, it's not available online at this time. I don't know if there's any plans for it to be online. Maybe by the time the plan is operating in 2023, it may be online. But once the plan is operating and they are sampling, they're discharging and they're sampling monthly, you can request that information through the Freedom of Information Office at DHEC, as well as for any existing facility now, you can get that information.
Two other things. DHEC produces a ton of data, and if we put everything online, it would just be incredible amounts of data out there. So that's kind of why not everything that you want to see is online. But if you fill out the form that's a feedback form and make that point, that's a point that we bring up sometimes to DHEC officials, that people, the public, would like to be able to access that information. Of course, it is available FOI, as Randy said. And there's also watershed managers that work at DHEC. They kind of do a more holistic overview of the different river basins and all the streams that lead into them, and they're kind of overseeing that. That's more towards your first question, and I can give you the name and number of the one that's over this area if you'd like after the meeting. If we were unable to get your question this evening, Randy's contact information is on the handout that you picked up at the sign-in table, as is contact information regarding other permits that Duke will need to obtain. We will now move into the formal public hearing. I appreciate your patience as I read a script that explains the procedures we will follow and some rules for this hearing. Good evening, my name is Karen Skipper, South Carolina DHEC's Community Liaison. It is now 7:02 p.m., Thursday, April 4th, 2013, and this public hearing is called to order. For the record, this hearing is being held at Encounter Church in Gaffney, South Carolina. DHEC has just concluded a 1-hour informational session in which department staff gave a general overview of the draft permit and answered questions. The purpose of this hearing is to provide a formal opportunity for you to give DHEC your verbal and/or written comments for the record. To be sure that everyone has the opportunity to be heard, questions will not be answered during this formal hearing. This permit has not been approved, nor will it be approved this evening. DHEC is here to listen to your comments and gain information from you that will be considered before any decision is made. So that everyone has an opportunity to comment, all speakers will be given up to 5 minutes per individual and 10 minutes if you are representing a group. If your comments will take more time than that, and you have them written down, you can leave them with me tonight or mail them to DHEC by the end of the comment period. All written comments must be received by DHEC no later than 5 p.m. on Friday, April 19th, 2013. All oral comments received this evening, along with all written comments received on or before April 19th, will be considered as part of the decision-making process. In order for tonight's hearing to move forward in a timely and orderly fashion, we will adhere to the following guidelines. There will be no interruptions, questions, or comments made while someone is at the microphone. All comments will be made from this podium. I will call elected officials first, and then anyone who indicated they wish to comment in random order. You will have up to 5 minutes per individual and 10 minutes if you are representing a group. Please stop when your time is up. Remember, this is not your only opportunity to comment. The comment period remains open until April 19th. While DHEC understands there are a variety of concerns about this proposed facility, the focus of this hearing is the specific application under review. DHEC must look at the specifics of a permit application with regards to the regulations and cannot deny a permit for political or emotional reasons. Do you have the sign-in sheets? 1 second.